Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Of course, another big game for Norwich City on the horizon. 12:30 kickoff again this Saturday, Pride Park, the trip to Derby. Going to be a difficult test. They're unbeaten at home so far this season. But, of course, after Norwich City's positive performance last Saturday against Watford at Carrow Road, I'm sure we're all feeling really upbeat. Want to see that positivity throughout the comments as we go through this show. And, of course, we'll get to your questions, comments, score predictions, thoughts, feelings, whatever it might be later on. Sam, I think there's only one place to start, though. The news that came out quite early this morning, Kellen Fisher signing a new long-term deal at the football club till 2028, club with an option of a further year as well. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about his performance against Watford in just a moment, but just purely that contractual news there, broke into the England under-20 setup, obviously been a pretty key part of the sort of first team dressing room now for over a year since he arrived from Bromley. Obviously originally bought as a development signing, but off the back of Saturday's performance, and I think sort of the expectation, the hope around him, that feels like a really big bit of news.
Yeah, I think maybe the least surprising contract news we've had for a while when you look at the way that it's gone for Kellen Fisher, the fact that, as you mapped out, he was originally signed for the under-21s, very much a development signing brought in from the National League and the 5th Division. And I think anyone who saw him in those first few games, I remember seeing him at Barnet, and he did look very much like a young player. He had quite a sort of small frame. He maybe wasn't the sort of player that you expected to be stepping up to the first team anytime soon. But David Wagner, to give him credit, saw something in those training sessions and in those pre-season games that made him want to promote Fisher up to the first team, probably negated the need for a first team signing as well, when you consider that Max Aaron's left the building that summer as well. And since then, it's just gone fantastically for Fisher. I think there have been times when maybe he's had to be a little bit patient, and it has been a little bit difficult because, especially under Wagner, Jack Stacey was just such a significant and clear first choice that basically he had to wait for Stacey to have a real off day, or maybe even 2 or 3 in a row, or to get injured or suspended to get his chance. So he's had to be patient, and I think probably the fact that he's risen through the ranks so quickly helped with that. I think if he'd been in the academy for 2 or 3 years and he'd been performing really well for the under-21s, then it might have been slightly more difficult, but probably the whirlwind nature of it made it a bit easier for him to be I don't want to say grateful, because he's very much earned it, but to have that humility when maybe he wasn't getting into the team. He's waited really well, and now he's got a head coach who plays the sort of football that seems to suit him really well, and he seems to suit Torup really well as well. So I think you see some of those performances early on in this season. You see the fact that he has that contractual situation, and the fact that obviously he's come in from non-league as an under-21 player. So I'm sure wage-wise, Norwich will probably get him the much better end of the bargain compared to some of the other players in their squad. And I'm sure it's something that Norwich have been thinking about for a while, because you speak to anyone in the building and they say that for a long while he's been a part of their long-term plans and somebody who they see as a big part of their future. So next logical step is to get him tied down for his best years. Now a Norwich player, unless a significant fee comes in, until at least 2028. And then see where things go from there. But definitely a very, very encouraging step. Definitely in line with the direction that Norwich wants to go in terms of young players. And on a personal level, an unbelievable rise from Kellen Fisher. As I think Ben Napper said in that statement from the club, credit to their recruitment team in the first place, because to pick someone from that level and for them to so quickly be playing Championship football as a 20-year-old, and it now feels like he's the one to lose that shirt almost. Yeah, it's gone extremely well for Kellen Fisher in the last sort of year and 3 months.
Yeah, obviously his performance against Watford won't have done him any harm. I think there's probably now an expectation that it's his shirt to lose. Jack Stacey's going to have to be competitive and battle back to try and regain that. Just going to bring up his stats or key stats from that game against Watford, and we'll sort of just discuss his performance on a personal level. Put this tweet out on Monday morning. 78 minutes he played, 100% accurate passes, 3 successful dribbles, which of course there is the most in the game. 4 out of 4 tackles won, 3 recoveries. We could keep going, Sam, but we'll leave it there. how positive was that as a step for him? I mean, we've seen him obviously in glimpses in Championship games last season, but never really got a consistent run. Now feels like he's going to kick on, and this is now his time almost.
Yeah, it's always been the cups where you feel like he's put in his best performances, which has been quite strange considering a lot of the time they've been against Premier League opposition. But I thought that was by far his best performance, probably in the Norwich shirt, but definitely in the Championship. He looked like somebody who was just stepping into the team and was a first team regular rather than a young player who was being given an opportunity. And I thought he adapted fairly quickly to what was quite a physical, quite a strong Watford team. And you look at some of the weaknesses that he's had previously, it's been aerial balls, it's been those physical battles at the back post, and they just simply weren't a problem for him, because that's clearly something that they've worked on. That's clearly something that he's improved upon. And when you can get those basics right, then I think it allows your technical ability to shine, because I think those attributes are something that he's actually shown fairly often, even in those performances where maybe he struggled against Sunderland and Cardiff last season, was substituted fairly early in both of those games. I felt that the technical ability was still there, but people, because of the errors, were just remembering the physical weaknesses and maybe some of the defensive weaknesses that he showed. But I thought once he had that out of the way against Watford, and once it was clear that he was more comfortable in that scenario, you could really see the confidence from that and the technical side of his game come to the fore. There's one video that I think circulated a little bit on social media of him just picking the ball out of the air, a ball that looks really difficult under pressure from three Watford players rushing onto him, and he just sidesteps them all and rolls the ball inside. And that level of calm and that level of quality on the ball is exactly what Torup is all about. And I thought that Watford performance was actually the epitome of what we'll probably come to see from a Johannes Torup fullback. So I think that works perfectly. And if that's a sign of what's to come, then that's great news for Norwich City and for Kellen Fisher. The next challenge for him now is just consistency, and hearing him talk and knowing what his ambitions are. It doesn't feel like he's the sort of person who's going to rest on his laurels and maybe let that consistency drop. I think he'll be very keen now to build on that performance and to make that sort of performance a regular occurrence.
Yeah, just see another comment here, sort of around contracts. Max on X saying, "Can we see Gunn following soon with a new contract? Is that one that might depend on how the season ends? Of course, sort of a relatively strong start again in the Championship. Obviously a top goalkeeper at this level, and obviously we know the connection he has with the football club, and further family as well. One you want to see maybe Norwich try and work on. Do you think there's one in the background that Ben Napper will be aware of?"
Yeah, last time I sort of heard anything about that, it was a couple of weeks ago, and the sense was actually that it was all pretty quiet. I think it is obviously a more complex deal and situation than the Fisher one, because although Fisher's talent is clear, there maybe hasn't been as much of the outside noise. If he was out of contract, obviously it's not really the same situation in terms of the urgency either. But if, for example, he had been out of contract, there might not have been the same level of Premier League interest, of interest from other clubs around the world that there probably will be in Angus Gunn. There's not the same, if we're being honest, wages. And that's definitely something for Norwich to consider when financially times aren't especially easy as a club in the Championship without parachute payments. That's something they definitely have to consider. But of course, it's something that's on Ben Napper's and Johannes Torup's mind, because first of all, we've spoken to them about it, and they've said so, of course, and they will be aware of all of those situations, especially Napper. But also because of the performances he's turning out week in, week out. You see him make some of the saves that he makes, and I'm sure Ben Napper is sat in that director's box thinking, I've probably got to do something about this quite soon. But as I said, a bit more of a complex situation, and that might be why it's taking a bit more time, probably all parties considering their options. But it's definitely a deal that Norwich will be probably quite keen to do if they can do it on the right terms, because for me, as a Championship club, you're not getting a better goalkeeper than Angus Gunn. He's a decent age. He adds to that sort of homegrown quota that they need in their squad as well. So many positives to having him at the club, and he would be a major loss. So definitely something they're aware of. Maybe not something that's super active right now, but I'm sure they'll be on it very, very soon.
Staying on goalkeeping and the coach, of course, the situation there that unfolded last week. Paul Clements departing to Stoke alongside, of course, Narcis Pelash. Week on, feels like maybe that goalkeeping coach position is getting a little bit closer to being filled, and even sort of the coaching position that Pelash left, that feels like there will be a successor in fairly short order. I mean, just sort of the timeline of where we are on that, Sam. Are we expecting anything to be announced sort of pre-derby?
Feels on the goalkeeper coach front like it probably will be pre-derby. That's something that they're in definitely advanced stages on and feel confident that they can do fairly soon. I think the first team coach might be a little bit later than that. They probably will be separate rather than sort of being announced at the same time and coming in at the same time. But yeah, I think the goalkeeper coach one is one that's definitely progressing in the right direction, one that they're confident of wrapping up quite soon. And if I had to say right now, I would say it probably will be before derby. So yeah, still plenty to keep an eye on as the week unfolds, and that's without even talking about the derby game that I'm sure we'll come on to.
We sure will. One player I just wanted to highlight and maybe get your thoughts on, Marcelino Nunez. I mean, we've spoken a lot about him on these preview shows over the last couple of years, and maybe that sort of inconsistency in his game. There's always been sort of really high moments, and then maybe games where he struggled a little bit with the physicality, the pace of the division, etc., etc. Feels like he's maybe settled in a little bit more this season. I mean, that performance against Watford, for me, he's one of the players that probably out of about 10 players or 11 players that all could have got man of the match, really. But he was excellent. Of course, the finish for the goal was top draw, but it feels like maybe those chance creation, that's starting to grow into his game a little bit, maybe taking that sort of baton from Gabby Sarra. I mean, not necessarily saying he's going to have quite the same level of goals and assists, but certainly in terms of his passing range and that, it's all there. So what have you made of his performances so far under the new management, Sam?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right in terms of the importance of adding that creative element and that slightly more attacking element, because you look at last season, especially, and I think his first season at the club was maybe different. I think that was inconsistency in terms of levels of performance. He would have good games, he would have bad games. Last season, I thought he was pretty good on a fairly regular basis, but it was those contributions in the final third that were fairly inconsistent. I mean, he rarely gave the ball away last season. He was always reliable in possession. He always did his job, but it was still only a few times that you saw him popping up with goals and assists. And for someone with that level of ability and all the strengths that we've spoken about previously around him and everything that those Norwich fans can see week in, week out, you would think that as a midfielder, especially not the deeper midfielder in that tore-up system, that he should be getting forward more, he should be scoring more goals like he did against Watford, really. And that's a really important thing for Norwich, because we look at some of the things they lost this summer. They lost Jonathan Rowe, they lost Gabriel Sarra, and chiefly, as we've spoken about plenty, that means a loss of goals and assists. And they need to find those from somewhere, because Josh Sargent, as good a striker as he is, can't just go and score 45 goals this season. So other people need to be chipping in. I think we've spoken a lot about Borja Sainz and the role that he can play in that. That looks like something he's adding even more to his game, but also you want it from your midfielders. And I thought that goal against Watford was exactly the right example of the sort of thing that he can contribute. But much like it was from his first season to his second season, in terms of improving that consistency of performance overall, you want to see him improving that consistency in front of goal and around the box, because he definitely has the quality to do it. It's just maybe about getting himself in the right positions and making the right choices in those areas.
Yeah, when I talk a little bit about Derby and maybe what we can expect from them, I mean, David's saying should be fascinated. I'm assuming that we can expect a direct, muscular approach from Derby. I mean, they're a very counter-attacking team, I feel, under Paul Warne. The physicality, of course, is evident to see. I mean, they've won all their home games so far this season, lost all their away games, which, of course, if you're a Derby fan and survival is probably the key this season, that obviously would be enough to keep them in the Championship. I think they've got a few key players missing this weekend. Ozo on loan from Crystal Palace, who's been raved about so far this campaign. He's out for, I think, 6 weeks. Callum Elder, the fullback, saw this morning that he's been ruled out for this game as well. what have you sort of made of their start so far in the Championship, Sal? Obviously under Paul Warne, well known to Norwich fans in terms of his love for the Canaries, and of course got plenty of family that are still season ticket holders. And I think there's probably a belief in his camp that if a job at Norwich ever came up, and that would be a position that he would snap your hand off for. Obviously, maybe going to be a little bit difficult under Ben Napper. Don't see their styles quite aligning, but yeah, what have you made of them so far this season, and what sort of test are you expecting from them on Saturday?
Yeah, I think they've actually done quite well so far to be, I think they're 10th in the league at the moment, as you mentioned, won all of their home games, done very well with that. And when you look at their squad, I think it's easy to assume that because they were a huge club in League One, quite a big club even by Championship standards, that they would come up and they would, be quite comfortable, and it wouldn't be a concern staying in the league. But you look at their squad actually, and it's not an amazing squad, to be honest. I think it's a squad where Paul Warne is getting the best out of them in the first few games this season. And when you look at the discrepancy between maybe some of the footballing quality that they've got in that group and the results that they're getting, that probably is explained by the sort of tactics that I think David diagnosed pretty well. It is fairly direct, it is fairly physical, it's a lot of crosses in the box, it's a fairly deep defence a lot of the time, and all of those stereotypes that you want to chuck at a lower half Championship team and maybe a Paul Warne team, they probably do apply to Derby. And having looked into them a little bit more in the last few hours, you quite often expect a bit of added nuance. You think that because people have these general ideas of these clubs and these stereotypes of these clubs, you think, oh, I'll drill into them, and maybe it isn't quite as simple as that. But yeah, it is a fairly rudimentary style of football, but you can't knock it when it's getting pretty good results for Derby, and probably better results than their fans expected going into the season. If they can continue to produce on that level, then they'll be very happy with that. And I think they'll try and do a similar thing against Norwich, and that should make it a fairly interesting game and a fairly interesting test for Norwich, because they haven't really come up against anything that direct or that defensive yet. Even when they've sort of put their possession game together and done especially well out of that, it's been against Watford and Coventry, who maybe do want to get at you a bit more and maybe do expect to have more control of the game than Derby probably will this week. So it's going to be a test of Norwich's creativity against what will be quite a deep defence. And it's also going to be a major test of their concentration in terms of Derby's quality from set pieces, some of the physical strengths that they've got. Jose Cordoba and Shane Duffy in the centre of defence, assuming that's what it's going to be, which you probably would unless there are fitness issues. They're going to have to be switched on for 90 minutes, because any weakness, any lapse, Derby will be desperate to exploit that, as they have a couple of times this season. So I think it's for Norwich a situation where if they can be at their best, then they certainly will be in the ascendancy and they should be expected to win that game. But anything below that and any poor moments, Derby will be in a position to exploit that, definitely.
Yeah, they're yet to concede at home as well this season. They're definitely kind of using that home advantage to their sort of key strength. I mean, I don't think they've actually lost a home game since early February against Charlton in League One. So they're sort of similar to Norwich, home form, Fortress, Pride Park. It's not going to be easy. With that, Sam, how do you think Norwich sort of approach this game, from a tactical perspective? You look at kind of their away trip so far this season. Obviously, Oxford is sort of a little bit of an anomaly with everything that went with that game. But obviously, Swansea, there was moments even there where, away from home, they sort of struggled a little bit. Do you think Trott would have learned maybe from those experiences on the road and maybe sort of trying to bring that into this game where we know that, as you sort of mapped out there, physical team, going to be a very different test once again?
Yeah, I don't know if it's hard to think of many levers that he can really pull to try and change things compared to what they have been previously. The interesting discussion for me is over Anis Ben Slimani, and if he's fit, do you start him? Given how good Norwich were against Watford, it feels fairly unnatural to shuffle the pack after that and to change too many things from that win. But equally, when we've spoken about some of the strengths that Derby have and some of the problems that they'll pose, you wonder if actually the same team and the same setup that got the result against Watford will be the same sort of team that can go and do that away from home against Derby with that excellent home form, as you referenced. So that actually will be a really interesting element if Torup does change it up too much. I thought actually a key part of that Watford win was Norwich's superiority numbers-wise in midfield. They had 3 in there, and they had inverted fullbacks adding to that number as well, whereas Watford only had 2. But Derby will have a 3 in there. They'll have a fairly solid, fairly narrow 3 who will want to make it a physical battle. And it will be harder for Norwich, I feel, to avoid it becoming that physical battle. I'm not saying they can't do it. If they play well enough and if they move the ball quick enough and if their movement is clever enough, then they should be able to get around that midfield rather than having to go toe-to-toe with them. But equally, with the number of players that Derby have in that area compared to Watford, you feel they do have a chance to get a bit closer to that Norwich midfield, and they will definitely have to be on it. So it will be interesting to see if Torup changes anything. I don't think he'll change loads. Obviously, we know how important that style of football is to them and how important that idea is to them. So I don't see them changing loads, but for me, there will have to be some adaptations, especially probably in that midfield area, to try and get through that Derby defence, because it is a very different prospect to facing Watford at home.
Yeah, we'll be live for another 10 or so minutes. So any more late sort of comments, questions, whatever, get them down below and we'll work our way through those in just a moment. You sort of referenced there, maybe not expecting massive changes, if any at all. Slimani, obviously, we'll get an update on tomorrow when we speak to Johannes Hoff-Torup. Just one player I wanted to ask a little bit about, Kade Gordon. Obviously, we saw him come off the bench on Saturday. Very limited minutes, but, some nice flashes of pace and what he's about. Of course, got 45 minutes the other night for the under-21s at Carrow Road, and that was a lovely turn. He sort of took it right away from the defender out wide and put a lovely ball across, and obviously playing at a lower level there, but certainly sort of flashes of what he's about. And obviously it's about building that fitness up. I mean, Sam, is it now about trying to get him on the pitch again a little bit earlier this Saturday? Keep building up that match fitness, because there's clearly a player there that is different to what Norwich have currently out wide.
Yeah, I think Torup is quite keen to use substitutes as a way of building people's match fitness up. It's not a situation where he's especially precious around wanting to focus purely on the game and purely on the short term and only giving players a very specific number of minutes if he feels tactically it's absolutely right. I mean, I'm sure he'd never take any risk in that way, but it's something we saw him do with Cordoba, where even going into championship matches, he was planning a certain number of minutes to get his fitness up. And from how he talks about Kade Gordon and how he talks about his talents, you'd expect that this is someone who he wants to be playing for a bit longer before too long. As he said, some positive signs for the under-21s in midweek. Some good signs against Watford as well, obviously contributed to that very intricate fourth goal. And I actually thought you could see some of his technical ability, but equally you could see some of the physical and fitness problems that maybe Torup has referenced at times. So I'm sure he's someone who Torup would like to get more involved. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw him get a decent chunk of minutes off the bench. But equally, there's a lot of competition in that area. Antti Sienats, I think, is starting to get up to speed in the Championship. Obviously, we all know about Borja Sainz's qualities, despite the fact that maybe he has got a bit of criticism in the last couple of games. I know Hernandez even, maybe not a starting option, but as somebody who Gordon is competing with for minutes off the bench, he's looked like somebody who really is able to impact games. And you'd think with the way that Derby play, that might be something that Torup will consider if it isn't going his way after maybe sort of 60 minutes. So getting everyone on the pitch and getting them all decent game time is the problem for Torup and certainly the problem around Gordon at the moment. But I'm sure if you asked any head coach whether they'd prefer to have that or they'd prefer to be chucking on Kade Gordon after 60 minutes, hoping for the best, then they'd go for the first option. So yeah, I think we will see more of him fairly soon. But equally, it's about that balance with some of the other options that they've got. And it does look all of a sudden like, from a position where we were talking about wingers as a weakness and a bit of a worry from the Norwich perspective, that actually now they have a bit of depth in there and a bit of competition, which is always good to see.
Yeah, of course, this marks the first of 3 games before the next international break. I mean, what do you want to see from these next 3 games, Sam? Is there sort of a minimum points target that you feel they need to hit? I mean, Torup's obviously spoken quite a bit in the press recently about maybe feeling they should have more points on the board. I suppose he's sort of looking at that Blackburn game and even Sheffield United at home. They sort of were really piling the pressure on trying to get the win. Where's the bar? 9 points, no points. Where do you sort of see the next 3 games?
I feel like maybe 6 points is not the minimum, but that would be maybe the par, or maybe 4 is the par. I think the Derby home record is quite a complex thing to wrestle with, because it feels like a newly promoted side who maybe doesn't have or don't have the same level of technical talent that Norwich have. You look at it and you feel like if you're targeting points tallies, that's a fairly easy one to go for 3. But with the record that they've got there, you look at the number of teams who have failed to beat them at Pride Park, and you think Norwich would have to do something fairly special to end that run. But I'm sure they'll back themselves to do that, and I'm sure they'll feel that if they can get their strengths into the game and they can make the game about themselves, that they'll have a fairly good chance of doing that. So I think they'll probably, well, I'm sure they'll be hoping for 9, but secretly, if you got any of them in a quiet moment and offered them 6 from these next 3 games, they probably would take it, because Leeds have lost a few good players, but they're still a very good side with a very good manager, as Norwich fans are well aware of. I don't think that will be easy at all. And then you're looking at the home game against Hull, and that feels like a real opportunity. So I think 6 would be pretty good. 4 would be acceptable, if not amazing. And then anything below that, you'd be pretty disappointed. But I think it is encouraging to hear Torup talk about points at this stage, because we all know it is a bit of a season of transition. Glenn Ridder's home said to you guys, speaking in Austria, that they aren't actually expected to get promotion for another 2 years after this season. So there is definitely an element of time there. But you see the level of ambition in Torup when he talks about the fact that he wanted more points from the start to the season. And that is always encouraging, even if you do have to look at the bigger picture as well. So, yeah, definitely something they're focused on. I'm sure they'll be hoping for as many points as possible, but it's not necessarily an especially easy 3 games overall, even if they will hope to win a couple of them.
Yeah, of course, progress is key at this point. A few people saw sort of saying about the 11. Shane Jones on X saying, would you keep the same team for Derby, barring any injuries? Of course, we'll get the update on that situation tomorrow. But I think we both sort of are probably in agreement. Maybe, Slimani, there's a debate if he's available. But I think Svartau had a pretty positive performance. And obviously, we spoke quite heavily about Nunez, and McLean, of course, was excellent against Watford as well. So it feels difficult to see any changes unless required. A few comments here around Onel as well. Dubai Canary, any update on Onel? Onel only lasted 7 minutes on Saturday, and also a question around his contractual situation. Yeah, he's definitely out of contract this summer. I think I'm right in saying, Sam. But in terms of his fitness, of course, we'll get a little bit more of an update tomorrow. But it'd be sort of a little bit of a shame if he's not available, because he's quite a useful player off the bench, as we've maybe seen in recent weeks.
Yeah, I mean, as I was talking about, the strength in depth out wide is definitely helped by him there. I know people, and probably Torup, don't see him as a prime starting option at the moment, but when you want players to come on and change games and to be a bit of a factor and to provide that competition on the training ground, Hernandez is definitely the sort of player who's able to do that. I think he said that when he was brought off against Watford, it was kind of not taking a risk rather than anything especially worrying, but probably one, given, as it was only 7 minutes, something that we probably have to wait until the press conference tomorrow to properly diagnose and talk about in terms of the impact of that. But as you say, I think although he maybe isn't much of a starting option right now, you look at some of the impact that he makes and has made in the last few weeks, and it would be a bit of a blow, if maybe quite a quiet one, for him to be out for any sort of significant period at the moment.
Yeah, we'll sort of come around to that point in the show where I'm going to push you for a score prediction. Plenty of positivity in the comments. Dubai Canary saying, hi folks, I can't see City winning this comfortably. The fact Derby in front of us in the table is ridiculous. But yeah, their home form is strong, as we've sort of mentioned a few times. So that's going to be an interesting element. Elliott going for a 2-0 Norwich City win. I mean, clean sheet would be good. Of course, kept the clean sheet at Coventry. And to be fair, their defensive sort of record over recent games has been pretty good. Obviously, just one conceded against Watford. The sort of mistake, unfortunately, at Swansea, which again, just one goal conceded. Sheffield United, just one goal. So feels like they've sort of tightened up a little bit at the back. Dubai Canary going. Of course, it is a 12:30 kickoff live on Sky. So plenty of goals usually between these two sort of down the years. So that's going to make for interesting reading. Max going over 3,000 away fans making the trip to Derby, which of course I'm sure they'll bring plenty of noise. As a 3-1 win here for Norwich, I'm assuming, which is of course good to see. Yes, we are well, I think, on this Thursday lunchtime. I say a few bits of praise as well for Kellen Fisher, Dan Mayhew. Great news for Fisher, stepped up well. Hope he can kick on now. Would start him over Stacey and Ash, feeling he's potentially a future captain for Norwich, which of course would be great to see. Sam, how are you feeling? There's a couple of 2-1 Norwiches as well come in from Rob and Peter. Do you share that positivity heading to Pride Park?
I have some positivity. I genuinely, in terms of Norwich's own performance levels, I think they're in a really good place, and they probably have had the opportunity to iron out some of the weaknesses that we've seen on the road. I think that win over Watford, will have given them a lot of confidence going into this one. But we've spoken a lot about the Derby unbeaten record at home. And if you consider the amount of confidence that Norwich fans are feeling at the moment, the invincible feeling that there is around Carrow Road at the moment, and you apply that to Derby, it's hard to really predict a team going and beating them, especially given their positive start to the season at Pride Park. So I think Norwich will actually play well, but I think Derby will be fairly solid defensively. I could see it being a 1-1. So not the most exciting of predictions, but I don't think that would be a terrible result, even if it's not maybe an amazing one. What about you, Adam? Are you feeling more optimistic than that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting game. I think sort of the first maybe 30 minutes could maybe determine how this game goes. I think if Norwich get on the front foot, almost like they did against Watford, and almost assert their quality, I think that's probably going to be how they can try and get something from this game. Hopefully, of course, 3 points, because I think if you go and player for player, Norwich probably have the better quality. But that Pride Park factor, they're always backed by a pretty good crowd. Derby, we've sort of mentioned, they're pretty good home form, yet to concede at home. I think it's almost, can Norwich get them on the ropes, get that early goal, and maybe that could play into this game. So going to go for a narrow Norwich win. I'm going to follow what Rob and Peter and a few others have said, go for a 2-1 Norwich victory, which, would be good, because I think Pride Park's historically a place they've struggled a little bit at. I think just 3 wins since 2003, only 2 wins against Derby in the last 10. But of course, they did win on their last visit to Pride Park, that goal from Kieran Dowell, the free kick, which seems quite a while ago now, sort of in the COVID times. So be good to go back to Pride Park and see what it's all about. A few late comments as well. Shane Jones saying, how impressed have you been with Cordoba? I mean, his first championship start against Watford on Saturday. What did you make of him, Sam?
Yeah, I thought he was really, really good. I felt a bit for him, actually, when you consider how long Norwich fans have waited to see him in a championship starting lineup, how delayed his sort of proper start in a yellow and green shirt has been since signing all those months ago, and then playing in the Copa America, coming back, having an injury in pre-season, and seeing Callum Doyle play really well in his position. It feels like it's been quite a long road to that first start. And then he marked it with what I felt was an excellent performance. But he was one in, as he said earlier, probably 10 players who could have got the Man of the Match award there. So, I thought he was really, really good, really encouraging. And in a sense, if it had been a worse team performance, he probably would have got plenty more plaudits for it. But the number of times the ball goes in behind and he shows that pace, and then he just almost casually shrugs an attacker off it. The ability on the ball as well. We were speaking to Ben Napper at the open training session in the summer, and he was almost at times, you could see his mind drifting away to Jose Cordoba, and he was just talking about Cordoba sort of between different topics, and you can see why he was so pleased with that signing, because for around £3 million, if he can continue to produce the levels of performance that we saw against a decent Watford side, then he's in line for a fantastic season, to be honest. But it is only one championship start for him so far. As with all the other players who were so good in that Watford game, it's now about proving that consistently. But definitely from the early signs that we've seen and the qualities that he's got looks like a very, very good Championship defender, and somebody who will earn Norwich probably quite a few points this season.
Yeah, question as well about who else is out of contract. I've just managed to get it up. A few of these do have club options. Angus Gunn is out of contract, of course. Christian Fashnak out of contract will have a club option. Jakob Sorensen, again, out of contract, club option. Grant Hanley is completely out of contract. Onel has a club option at the end of this year. Same with Ashley Barnes. George Long out of contract. Tony Springett, Jonathan Tomkinson, Jaden Warner, and Archie Mayer also has a club option. So plenty of players out of contract, which I'm sure, some of those that Ben Napper, Johannes Torp want to work with, further on into the future. I'm sure they'll get sorted out between now and the end of the season. Dan Mayhew saying 0-0 for me. Derby defensively strong and Norwich wasteful in the final third. Hopefully they can find that clinical edge they had against Watford, because, that was certainly a step forward in terms of that sort of wastefulness, that they maybe showed against Swansea in the latter stages and some of the other games. Sam, I think with that, probably time to round off. Of course, plenty of content coming your way across our channels. We'll be speaking to Johannes Torp tomorrow, so the full press conference will be on our YouTube channel. Sam will, of course, do Tactics Boards tomorrow morning as well, so you'll have sort of more of an insight into how he sees this game tactically and a setup for Norwich. I'm probably expecting him to maybe go unchanged, but of course that's up to Sam to decide between now and tomorrow morning, so worth checking that out, of course, for that. I spoke to a Derby fan the other night, which is now available on our YouTube channel, so sort of more of an insight into how tough the last few years have been for them, promotion back to the Championship, and how they expect to fare. Of course, we had the under-21s content on Tuesday night, which well worth checking it out. I thought there's some really nice sort of quotes coming out of that, maybe about sort of how they bridge the gap between the academy and the first team so far this season. So yeah, that's worth looking at. And of course, Sam will be at Carrow Road tomorrow night for the under-21s game against Manchester United, which I think they've sold nearly 5,000 tickets so far. So that's going to be a pretty good occasion. I think if you're free tomorrow night and in and around the Carrow Road, Norwich area, then worth making the trip down. Of course, if you're making the trip to Derby, enjoy it. Safe travels, and of course, we hope to see you bring back 3 points. Thanks for watching, Max, and everyone for tuning into this show. And with that, we'll see you at Pride Park on Saturday lunchtime. And of course, hoping for another Norwich City 3 points.